Well, good morning. And this is day two of the Black History Month 2022. So today we're going to our brief topic. Because remember, we're only going to talk about one thing every day for all 28 days. So today's topic, we're going to talk about the history, and particularly we're going to talk about quote unquote history, your history, the history of the organizations that you belong to, that you work with. But more importantly, let's start closer to home. Let's talk about the history within your own family as it relates to black people. Okay, what is your history there? Because there's got to be some history there somewhere, right? Oh yeah, there's some history. So it's sort of like, what do you know and when did you know it, and what difference does it make to you anyway? I recall I was thinking as I was trying to think about what to say today, and what we're going to talk about a little bit today for these couple of minutes. And I was remembering back when I went to Little Rock Central High School back during the Civil Rights era. Many of you have heard that story already. And it's a part of my story, so I tell it over and over again. It took me decades to get to the point where I can tell, and I'm sure there are probably some things in your life having to do with race and being black, or knowing somebody who was black, or circumstances somebody who was black was in, that you still have not been able to really talk about because you really don't want to admit that was really what was going on. Well, one of the things that I do remember when I started to think back about my time at Little Rock Central High School was I kept asking myself all the time, every day it would be in the back of my mind. I just couldn't understand why people didn't like the fact that we were there, and to be personal about it, that I was there. Why was it? Why did I have to be heckled when I was walking down the hallway? Why was it that I always had to make sure, that I had to represent my whole race? And so I ended up just studying as hard as I could study and making sure that I learned everything and did just right. My parents were always telling me you got to be twice as good to get half as far. And all of that was in the back of my head. It really was. And I didn't know, why am I doing this? What is this about? I even looking at how I dressed, because I had to make sure that I dressed sort of like the white kids dress, so that I isn't that a joke? So that I would quote unquote be accepted. Well, I wasn't going to be accepted anyway. So I guess what I want you to do is to have these kind of conversations when you're at your house. Because when I looked back on Little Rock Central High School, there was one little tidbit of information that I didn't think about. Because I was a child at the time, but I'm not a child anymore. And one of the things that I thought about later on in life was the fact that that school was never ever built for people like me. That school was created and it was built in a different era of time. It was created in a time when it was perfectly normal for black people to stay out of the way, get pushed out of the way. Don't come over here. This is for us, and that's for you. It was a time. It was built during a time when black people were expected almost to be servants to the white people that were there. That was their role. That was what was expected of them. It was a different time, and it was a time when all of this was perfectly accepted. It was accepted, maybe complained about a little bit by those of us who were the recipients, but basically accepted. We sort of went along with the whole thing. So having said that, now let's talk about your place. Your place was your home situation, whatever it is now. Was it really started at a time when this whole word inclusion really didn't exist? Your institution, your business, excuse me, your organization, were they created during that time by any chance? Because if they were, what you may be experiencing with this struggle, and it is a struggle. Every time we talk about diversity and inclusion, we talk about it as a struggle, like it's really hard. We got to quote unquote manage diversity. Why? Why? There's something that we don't know, or something that we're not talking about. So today, my challenge to you is I want you to talk about it. I want you to dig deep, and I want you to think about the history. What is the history of blacks in your organization, in your school, in your institution, in your business, in your family, in your neighborhood, in your community, everywhere? What is the history as you know it? As you know it. And if you don't know it, that says a whole lot. We may pick that up with another topic along the way. But I want you to think about it, and I want you to talk about it, and I want you to talk about it to your families first, okay? To each other. And then we're going to talk about it later because you got to figure out, well, how do I find that out? How do I find out the history in my organization? And then I also want to say, related to that whole thing of history, you notice quite often that when we as black people become a part of anything and we are the first, we'll talk about that person being the first. This is the first African American this, or the first black person that did this, or the first person that did this. First, the first are pointed out completely. And I've had some friends of mine who really got a bit upset about that. They said, why do we always have to be recognized as the first? Why don't you just say, well, she just happens to be a black person who's doing this, or just happen to be a person in this position, or a person who discovered this, or a person who did this. I think if you really take the time to really sit and talk honestly, openly, unfiltered, I think you start to figure out why we have to celebrate every first, because we are still seeing first to this very day. And when I say we're seeing first, we're not talking about first with some big time earth shattering discovery. It can be first at the very, very basic level of being, because it's taken us this long to be recognized. So now, as a part of that history, I invite you to ask the question, what is the history? Who was the first black person? How many black people do I know? What's their story? What's their life? Think about it, okay? And then we'll come back. Tomorrow, we'll have another topic. And when we get toward the end of the last week, we're going to make all these topics sort of merge together, okay? Have a good